Howdy, y'all. Welcome to another episode of Redneck Rising, except this time it's super special because it's our very first bonus episode. I could not wait to drop this episode for a couple of different reasons. First, it was such a good conversation with so many rich highlights. And second, because I literally couldn't wait. If I went according to the schedule of episodes that I have planned right now for the next couple of weeks, according to the regular Tuesday drops, it wouldn't come out until after the call to action that comes with the episode. I am sure that most of y'all saw the show notes. So if you are not the kind of person who looks at show notes, that is okay. But at the top of the show notes, there is a link to sign up for POWHR's newsletter where you can learn how to act in solidarity against the Mountain Valley Pipeline and against the side deal that is currently on the table in Congress. And specifically, POWHR, along with their coalition partners that are doing the frontline work on the ground and come from communities that have historically been on the front lines of this work, Indigenous communities, other communities of color, and folks who live on the front lines in Appalachia right now, are going to be taking the Appalachian Resistance up to DC on September 8th, which is exactly 4 weeks from today. If you are listening to this episode on the day that it dropped, hopefully you're listening to this before September 8th so that you get your little booty over to the show notes, click on that link, and go find out how you can support their efforts. Even if you can't make it up to DC, there are lots of ways to support their work and the work of their coalition partners. There is no role too small in the movement towards liberation.
I think we got the string.
So what is the side deal? Well, thank goodness for Grace because she tells it so much better than I do.
Yeah, because
there is a side deal that is on the table in climate negotiations happening behind closed doors in Congress that essentially greenlights Joe Manchin's dangerous pet project, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, aka the MVP.
We just got really lucky.
It greenlights the project by name in a crooked deal that's cutting corners at the expense of frontline communities that are already suffering at the hands of the climate crisis.
Like with many things.
Exactly.
Bypassing checks and balances in order to undermine bedrock environmental laws.
Exactly.
Good old
capitalism grind.
Rights, all
waits for nobody.
Just to make a buck.
Exactly.
Again, please check out the show
turn
notes.
and burn.
Click on the link
I guess
to sign up for POWHR's newsletter where they will hook you up with all the information you need to figure out how you can act,
I guess that's as good
whether
a place
you
as any.
are in Appalachia,
I'm Grace Tuttle,
in the heart of West Virginia, or if you are
I'm thrilled
out
to be
on
here
the West
with you.
Coast
This
in
is
California
awesome
and want to show some solidarity.
Such a ripe opportunity for the
in
moment that we're in.
As a disclaimer,
I'm an organizer
are so many
with
voices
POWHR
that can
Coalition,
and should
which
be
stands
involved
for
in telling
Protect
the
Our
story
Water
of
Heritage
the
Rights.
Mountain Valley Pipeline,
And
the story
we are
of the
an
history
interstate
of
coalition
environmental
of
extraction
folks from
and
West Virginia
the push
and
for
Virginia.
transition
So we are
towards
proud
regeneration.
Appalachians,
And this
dedicated
episode of this
to protecting
podcast
our
is only
water, the
one
lands that are here in the
the ways
communities
that this
from
story
harms
can be told,
caused
and
by
it is certainly
expanding
not
fossil fuel infrastructure.
I would
And
love to
so
feature other
our group
voices
formed in
who
response
are on
to
the front
announcement
lines
of the Mountain Valley Pipeline,
or who
which I know we're going to get into.
This story in
but
a very
just a
personal
snapshot,
way.
it's a 303
we are by no means
mile
the
long,
experts, not
incomplete
myself.
fracked gas
Grace
pipeline,
knows far more than I do, but
that pulls,
even
that would
between
pull,
the two of us, we are certainly not
it's
the
about
experts
halfway
of this
finished.
conversation. So
would
I would just
pull
encourage
gas
anybody
from the
who's
Marcellus
listening
shale
to this
fields
episode,
and
please
pump it
continue
down
to seek
to
additional
the
voices
Transco
to help inform your
interconnect, which goes all the way down to the Gulf
the
of
fossil
Mexico.
fuel industry.
So that's what we were formed to fight
against,
and we are
indigenous lands,
still engaged in a
and
voracious battle against
insatiable
almost a decade
pursuit
later.
for
And we have an incredible coalition
extraction of resources under
diverse
white
and
supremacist
powerful and
capitalism
wonderful allies who fight that alongside of us.
Movement against it that
and we're
has
also
been
part
led
of
by
a
people
growing
of color
grassroots
throughout
movement
history.
and existing
So
grassroots
in the show notes,
movement
I
in
also
Appalachia
provide
to stop
a very brief
all
list that is certainly not
not just the
comprehensive
MVP,
of a few
and to address
resources
the climate
that
crisis,
Grace
which
mentioned in the
is
episode.
here in Appalachia now, as we all know.
And
we only
a few
need to look
others that
to
can just help
the
you
devastating floods in eastern
get
Kentucky
started
and
on that
the sort of
ongoing
like
journey
incredibly
of
lackluster
seeking additional
response from the
perspectives.
federal government and
That
the way
said,
that people
today
are
we
coming
talk with
to each other's
Grace
aid.
Tuttle. her, a self-identified Appalachian organizer with POWHR Coalition. POWHR stands for Protect Our Water, Heritage,
People versus Fossil
Rights.
Fuels Coalition.
Grace
so I'm also
grew up
an organizer
among
in that
Appalachian elders
coalition,
who
and
fostered
that
her
is,
love for connecting
really the
with and
united
stewarding
fight
the land.
to stop
And as an
all new
adult, she
fossil
returned
fuel
to her
projects in the
Appalachian
United
roots
States,
to live in the
combat
Allegheny Mountains
environmental
of
injustice,
Virginia on
stand
Monacan
with all
ancestral
front
lands.
lines of all
POWHR is made up of diverse, powerful frontline community members and Appalachians from across West Virginia and Virginia
really
that are committed to ending the era of fossil fuel consumption and
build out
the economy that is
really
centered in extraction and exploitation.
And I guess the more
Grace tells us about the MVP, the current day reenactment of the classic story of Appalachia and America's history of sacrifice zones that capitalism depends on as it tries to feed its insatiable
crazy,
hunger.
Insane,
We talk about learning from Indigenous
in
leaders and BIPOC women about the
probably
work
most
that we
annoying
have
to
to
most
do
people
to
way,
address,
I'm always talking about
face,
it, and I'm always
and
needing to water my
unlearn the
plants
harmful
and
practices
check on
that carry
things
white
and read
supremacist
about it. I'm like
capitalism,
psycho book
especially
nerd
within our organizing
regarding.
spaces,
I don't know if you can't
must
see it, but
avoid
it's back there.
replicating supremacy
When the
and
sun goes
oppression.
down a little bit, you can
Our
see the
conversation
mountains
digs
behind
into
me,
some
and
of the
then my
ways
garden's
that the
back there.
destruction of physical space and resources
Oh man, my garden is my
simultaneously serves
love,
to
and it's my
destroy
reason
evidence
for
of
being
history,
and my reason for why I
communities, and
do
cultures that
what I do,
contradict the
basically.
myths that
And
uphold that
within
white
that,
supremacist
I consider
capitalism.
myself an Appalachian,
And the other thing that we touch
or a
on,
half-Appalachian,
which I think is a great
half
note
my
for me
family's
to
from
wrap up
Appalachia and
this
half
intro
not.
on as we transition
But
into
yeah, I mean that's the gist of me.
protein of the
I really
episode,
want to be
if you will,
an herbalist
is
someday.
the
That's
idea
like
that
a dream of
community
mine,
organizing
in conjunction
isn't
with my
about
gardening.
educating. It's about
I call it
unlearning,
in training
about
right now
walking
because
alongside of
I'm a little
folks
busy
while
with
they heal.
fighting the fossil fuel industry, but
let us ground ourselves in that while we
but I mean,
listen
I'm just
to
like a
this
voracious
bonus
learner,
episode.
and I love people.
Enjoy,
I love history. I love to understand things and to be part of this climate justice movement. So that's me. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing all of that. I have a much better understanding of the person across the screen.
Yay!
I am so curious about this love for gardening that is like at the core of your climate justice fight and what you do with your time as a human and your energy, because this is very energy consuming work. So like, where did that come from, that love for gardening?
Yeah, so like I said, I consider myself half Appalachian. It's my Twitter handle too, LOL. I think I'm funny sometimes. I'm
here for it.
Thank you. You might be the only one. I grew up in Northern Virginia because my parents moved there because that's where the jobs were. Hello, Appalachian story. And so I grew up in a very different sort of what I consider sterile and very competition focused, void of cultural belonging that I would have loved to have. And I just grew up like so hungry. I would go to visit my mama and papa in the mountains, and I would see, I just grew up so hungry for that gardening and Appalachian life that I loved so much when I got to see bits and pieces of it and spend the weekend in our cabin, and it just like, I just knew that's what I was drawn to do. And I was so curious about plants. And over the last like 6 or 7 years, I got to work at a CSA farm in college. And I mean, that just lit a fire underneath me. And I just got obsessed and got my hands on every book I could get, but just putting container gardens on all the apartments that I had, like it just, a lot of people have a story like that where they just felt so intrinsically tied to it and did it in any way they could. And now I'm lucky to have this space on family land that my grandparents helped me build, like a big 50 by 50 foot garden space that's deer fenced. And so it's just my baby and I love it so much. And I get to do it with my grandparents. I get to give my mama and papa fresh vegetables every week. And yeah, I'm about to bring them some tonight after this.
I'm gonna cry.
I know, it makes
no
me
one's
cry.
made me cry out this show.
And they used to garden. They grew up dirt poor in Appalachia. They had to garden. My mom always says, I was green before it was cool. She's like, but then they stopped, they stopped because of Walmart and just the corporatization of everything in Appalachia. Dollar General is in our little town now instead of, so I'm in a unique situation. I grew up in the suburbs with Appalachian family, and then I got to move to my Appalachian family when I was an adult. And it's so cool to be able to spend that time with my grandparents and learn from them and be in this place, and also be kind of a different energy in this place than a lot of folks out here are. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's kind of where it came from.
I love just like that you were drawn, like even growing up kind of outside of the physical container of your Appalachian heritage, like how deeply you were like drawn to that. And I admire that so much. And a lot of that has been returning to me as an adult too, is like the drive to like reconnect with some of the more physical aspects of our culture. Like, and as you're talking, I thought of this because you're talking about taking your grandparents' vegetables. And I feel like something that I remember very distinctly as a kid was like all the family members who like grew food, canned food, that kind of stuff would like always be trading and like putting food off on other people. Like, take this. And I live in an apartment complex, which is like, I live in Waynesville, North Carolina, which is west of Asheville. If you know, like the little corner of the state that gets forgotten. And there's only like 2 apartment complexes in my whole county, you know, and I live in one of them. But I have such amazing neighbors, and like one of my neighbors who's also the mom of a toddler has the best green thumb, like in an apartment complex, straight up in like planter pot. She's growing watermelon, cucumbers, cantaloupe, like just an assortment of stuff. And like seeing her, I mean, we have plants, we have like strawberries and some other stuff on my patio, but I was like, we could straight up start like a community garden right here. Seriously. And like, we could all be trading like produce and saving each other so much money. Like, in this economy, let's do this.
Right.
My ancestors prepared me for this moment.
Absolutely. It's so funny. Like, I'll go up to my grandparents and I'll bring them like zucchini, and they'll be like, no. Like, Timmy and Bobby and Johnny's already brought us.
'Tis the season. There's a meme. Well, not a meme. It's a clip from a real Facebook group from out here in Western North Carolina where someone posted, it was like, PSA, 'tis the season, do not leave your car unlocked or else you will be left with a bushel of zucchini.
I've seen that. It's so true. I'm staring at a bunch of them right now in the kitchen that I'm like, all right, everyone get ready to eat zucchini bread.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
So tell us about, you gave us a good overview of like what the MVP is. Can you tell me, like, as if I have never heard of the MVP before, like what the battle has looked like over the last decade, essentially, that you've been in this work, and kind of bring us up to speed?
Absolutely. And I would love to be like, how much time do you have? Because it's such an amazing story.
All the time in the world.
try to give you and everybody listening kind of a nutshell version. And I want to preface this by saying that I am by no means the expert on this story. And there are so many perspectives and so many ways that this project has been combated, and so many stories that deserve to be told. So I want to preface my sort of laying out here that I'm going to miss things. And there's so many voices in this coalition that are fighting so hard. So just a shout out to all those people who've been working and fighting against this whole system as part of this movement. We're just one. And that's another thing I want to emphasize. We're just one fight. All of the fights are connected. It's the same enemy. It's the same playbook. The more we can get on board with connecting these fights, the stronger we're going to be at dismantling this stuff from start to finish, from the frack fields to the pipelines to the export terminals in the Gulf. So I'll start with that, but we're all united. So the MVP was introduced sort of as a result of this gigantic fracking boom. Sort of 10, 12 years ago. It was super crazy. And I really recommend, I'm a book nerd. I'm sorry, I'm going to be evangelizing books on you this whole time. Up to Heaven and Down to Hell by professor and journalist Colin Jerelmack. phenomenal explanation of fracking, drilling, what that does to communities, what the land leasing process is. Again, the boom and bust cycle that Appalachia has been victim to for the last, gosh, I don't know how many decades, hundreds of years. It's phenomenal. So that I won't even touch that because he does it so well. But yeah, so these, sort of mega projects geared at getting that Appalachian shale gas out of those states, West Virginia and Pennsylvania, Ohio, the fracking fields, and out to market, basically out to the coast. So it's kind of a result of that boom. And that's very clearly busted, right? Like, look at the communities in Pennsylvania who were told they were going to be rolling in the gold coins. Like, it's the same freaking story over and over again. And shout out to Ohio River Valley Institute. Any of their like APPALACHIA reports just tell you the story about what was sold to these communities and what was the result. And it's always the same thing in Appalachia. We've seen it over and over again. I know you cover this and you're passionate about this, but this is just another example. So proposed in 2014, and stuff really got going in 2015. And, there were initially, people got these notices served on them, and were like, what the heck is this? The process for letting people know that, hey, I'm a natural gas company and I'm going to take your land and this is what's going to happen. And this is, one of the biggest, you couldn't tell this story without starting it off, without talking about the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC for short. That is one of the most powerful and sort of insidiously omnipresent in oil and gas regulation. They regulate things like markets for electricity. They're an economic regulator. Oil and gas. They regulate oil and gas pipelines, hydroelectric stuff, and I'm not going to be able to remember everything they regulate, but it's really interesting to dig into them. And they are kind of a rogue agency who has their authority to regulate natural gas from the Natural Gas Act from Congress. So they have so much authority over these pipelines and these projects that is really far-reaching and has, that act was, I think, approved in the 30s. So, I mean, our world is just wildly different. And not to mention the climate crisis that we're all in. So anyway, FERC is the agency that was in charge and is in charge of issuing what's called a certificate of public convenience and necessity. So that's what something like this needs in order for them to use eminent domain authority, which is when they can take people's land for the greater good, quote unquote. That's a wildly simplified explanation, but this project did in fact obtain a certificate of public convenience and necessity, and has since filed for the original target date to get this project in service was 2018. Since then, the company has filed for an extension and received an extension on that original certificate, and that's about to run out this October. So I wish I was celebrating because they've applied for another 4 years with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to finish the project. And if they were granted that would mean they were given 9 years to complete this project. Anyway, let me go back to the beginning. They get the certificate. That means they're allowed to exercise eminent domain on the entire 300 miles of this route. Another very important thing about this pipeline is that when it goes down through Virginia, it goes through, I think, 5 counties in Virginia, most of which, or if not all of which, are Appalachian counties. It gets to the Transco Interconnect, and there is another pipeline that the same developer has proposed called the MVP Southgate Extension, which would go into North Carolina. So it would get it even closer to the coast. And that pipeline and the compressor station is cited for environmental justice communities, Black communities, communities of color, communities of low income, just like the main line is cited for environmental justice communities, mainly rural, low income communities. So just to know that there's a second part of this pipeline And, then once they received permission to exercise eminent domain, the legal part of this is not my expertise. So I'm kind of going to jump over that and just say that there's a whole lot of heartache and really awful process that people are put through with that. There's obviously in Appalachia, there's a complex history of us being on stolen land in the first place. And then this project is stealing land from another round of people. And there's the issue of indigenous erasure and all of the indigenous peoples that are in these areas and their tribal status, be it state or federal, and whether that gives them consultation with various agencies. And again, I'm not the expert there. I would love for somebody who is to come and tell that story because I don't want to speak for anybody, but I just want to touch on it because it's important. And so eminent domain piece, which basically means offering people some of money for their land. And if they don't, negotiations, and then it can go to the company suing people for their land and taking it by force, basically. Again, not the expert there, but part and parcel with that is a wide array of permits that the project needs. So permits from the Forest Service. The project wants to cross the Jefferson National Forest, cross public lands. I would argue this is not an adequate or suitable use of our public lands. And so, in fact, did the U.S. court system multiple times. The Fish and Wildlife Service. This project threatens the existence of multiple endangered species, the candy darter, the Roanoke log perch, the Indiana bat, and more. And it was found that this project would jeopardize those species, in fact, by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit multiple times. So the pipeline still doesn't have permits from the Forest Service or the Fish and Wildlife Service, nor do they have a Clean Water Act permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm kind of going to skip over all of the, there's been a long list of permits that they sought, got revoked, sought again. I'm kind of going to skip over that, but just know the history is so full of people protesting this project with, the integrity of their communities in mind, with a mountain of scientific evidence, cultural evidence, just massive public opposition to this, and it being just completely falling on deaf ears across the federal government, all the agencies that were responsible for allowing this to happen. Not to mention the massive, massive risks to our beautiful, incredibly important Appalachian ecosystems, all of the waterways this crosses, the radioactivity risks from the oil and gas waste, and, think the gunk that's going to be in the bottom of this pipe if it ever pumps gas. And of course, the downstream impact of the emissions. So this pipeline could lead to the equivalent of 23 new coal plants worth of greenhouse gas emissions a year. So if that sounds like the craziest thing to be doing in a climate emergency, that's because it is. So that's sort of, and that's a lot of background on the pipeline, but POWHR has been sort of the directly impacted community groups that has been one of the leaders fighting this on every level. Local, state, and federal, attending public hearings, submitting extensive technical filings, using their personal expertise and their lived experience on these places that they know and love to fight this project, to advocate for each other in their communities. Legal fights, fighting some of these decisions that were wrong, these permits that were flawed and illegal, and so POWHR has been one of sort of the one of the big leaders in that it's a collection of all of the directly impacted communities along the main line. And as the fight evolved and the Southgate was announced, the sort of Stop MVP movement and coalition has really grown to include and to be broadened to this big fight that I mentioned, including MVP Southgate. These are two separate pipelines, but they're intrinsically connected and they need each other to exist. And we need to fight together, and we need to fight alongside of and follow Indigenous and Black leadership in this fight. And, it's just, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
No, you're fine. I have ADHD. So like if you see me looking to the side, it's because I'm
Cool.
typing my questions because I'm like, I will forget what I wanted to say. That's like such a helpful rundown to bring us up to speed. And one point of clarification, when you mentioned the amount of emissions that would be created as a result of this pipeline, if it's successfully constructed, then my brain like immediately went into like trauma dissociate, no big numbers. Like, I don't want to know what this means. So can you explain, like, I'm 5, like,
yeah,
and contrast to what we should be doing, what that is doing.
Totally. And yeah, I apologize for this has been like a crazy couple weeks of this fight being in the national space. So I'm being really jargony and I don't like to do that. But
don't apologize. I'm really great about asking questions when I need clarity. Awesome. So I'll definitely,
so glad, and please do it as much as you need. So that number, another way to put it, and this statistic comes from our friends and fellow MVP fighters and partners, Oil Change International. They're a fantastic organization that does a lot of research and advocacy and briefings and, kind of white papers about oil and gas projects and climate change and fossil fuels. That number is equal to, another way to think about it is 19 million passenger vehicles, the emissions of that many cars per year. So if you were to picture 19 million, I don't know how to picture that. It's a F ton of cars on the road. Whatever percentage of the American population that is, additionally per year. I mean, that's catastrophic. I mean, all evidence, the IPCC reports, the UN, so many other countries in the world are treating this like the absolute flat out threat to humanity and all life on Earth that it is. And, constructing this at all, let alone with even like less emissions, is just a catastrophe for ecosystems and for our atmosphere and for all the people who are going to suffer first and worst from the increased warming. We don't have that buffer anymore before we hit 1.5 degrees warming. So it's like a Pandora's box of horrible impacts from this pipeline that I could go on and on about, but I'd love to talk, sort of wrap up that sort of like awful, oh my God, doom and gloom, because that's not really what we're about either. We're fighting this thing, and our fight has been winning.
So one question I do have is like this FERC, you're the regulating commission is what you described it as, which for me, again, I like to assume the point of this podcast is, one, to make things that are intentionally complicated because capitalism benefits from it way more accessible, without people having to do a ton of, like research or whatever. And then also two, to break down a lot of myths about like Appalachians and like what we care about, because the truth is that like mutual aid is Appalachian culture, like community organizing, multiracial worker like uprisings, like that is Appalachian culture. So the FERC, just for listeners, what I'm kind of understanding it to be is similar to like the federal level of a utilities commission, like what we would have here in North Carolina. So, and basically what our utilities commission does is Duke Energy, if you're familiar with those guys, they monopolize North Carolina's energy market, and are the only real other energy providers that exist are very far and few between, like local co-ops, essentially, in municipal like kind of jurisdictions. And because Duke Energy is a monopoly, the Utilities Commission serves to regulate them, check them. And so they kind of have power over, one, Duke Energy's like priorities, like in the state of North Carolina, and how they produce energy. So like you were saying, like, do they do that by fracking? Do they do that with nuclear energy? Do they do that with hydro energy? Like whatever. And then the other thing they have control over is like rates, like what we pay as people. So for those who are not familiar with this fight, like this whole like pipeline energy like how they make energy, how they store energy, how they use energy, like the consequences of it has been this ongoing fight for forever. Right. And it's not just like the pipelines, like Duke Energy back in 2017, they were trying to raise our utility rates here in North Carolina because they had been improperly storing coal ash, which is, the what shows up after you burn coal. And 40,000 tons of coal ash ended up in the Hall Creek River in North Carolina. And they got fined by the Utilities Commission. So the Utilities Commission is like responsible for that, right? And because they got fined, they then were like, oh, well, we're going to increase utility rates to like make up for these fines that we just had to pay and just make the ratepayers pay it. And whenever they want to do something like that, they have to run it by the Utilities Commission. So just trying to like explain like the body as far as like I understand it. And it sounds like this is the same thing on a very much bigger scale for the whole nation.
Yeah. And like, I'm not a FERC expert, so I don't want to like, I want to make sure I'm describing only what I know. But yeah, like they're an independent agency. They regulate interstate transmission of natural gas and oil and electricity. So that whole part is extraordinarily complicated. And you're right, it's by design. And they also regulate natural gas and hydropower. That's the list I was looking for. So just extraordinarily wide-reaching and powerful. And it's complex, like the relationship with the states. And of course, it's different for every state. And, what authority the states have is like Virginia does have authority to issue a type of Clean Water Act permit called a Section 401 permit, which they issued for MVP again back in December. Which basically says you have permission to, this is unlikely to harm X, Y, and Z waters and cause this amount of harm or mitigate it with this and that. And obviously we opposed them granting that permit with all of the evidence of, MVP's past environmental violations. And one thing I want to speak to really quickly when you're talking about what is Appalachia, one part of POWHR that I want to make sure I touch on and the MVP fight and the history of the fight is the Mountain Valley Watch Project. That is a project of POWHR that was created as a way for directly impacted people and people who care about this to protect their waters and to hold our regulatory agencies accountable for when these companies break laws and when they violate environmental regulations and when they commit water quality violations. And so the Mountain Valley Watch Project is a, citizen monitor force that is trained in, very legitimate ways, a lot of times by one of our partners, West Virginia Rivers Coalition. We love them and they're a fantastic advocate for West Virginians. Their staff scientists will train people how to monitor water quality. And so people can, go out if there's a weather event and monitor sediment in streams, and report those things where they need to go, report possible pollution incidents. We have drone pilots who are, I'm actually a drone pilot, which is a fun fact with licensed with the FAA, believe it or not.
That's so cool.
Fun fact with Mountain Valley Watch Project. And, construction is in a tricky spot in the pipeline right now because they don't have those permits that I was mentioning. So they can't construct through water and they're kind of stalled. So we haven't been doing as much of that monitoring as hopefully we don't want to need to. But and I want to get to this too with the deal with Manchin. There's so many balls up in the air right now, but Mountain Valley Watch Project is really kind of part of the heart and soul of POWHR. It's where people who are impacted by this project and people who care can look out for the places that they love and hold regulatory agencies accountable when those places are violated. So that's been a huge part of our fight that I would be remiss to not mention. And just to give our listeners sort of a idea of what the MVP has already done environmentally wise. They've already violated Virginia's water protection laws more than 300 times. And we're forced to pay a couple $1 million for that. They have violated water quality certification rules for upland, meaning like hilly, mountain areas, which of course, like it is in at least 1,500 times. And that was found in a report of extensive sort of combing through documents and compliance reports by our allies at Wild Virginia. And it's kind of funny, our movement is very cross-pollinating. I'm also on the board of Wild Virginia, and we work closely with POWHR and vice versa. And Wild Virginia is an org that protects and connects wild places. So we've also been fighting the MVP the whole time, and the ACP, and protecting Virginia's water, and also habitat connectivity, which of course is impacted by this too, and endangered species, and the list goes on.
Oh my gosh. It's so frustrating. It's like, what the fuck is the point of having laws on the books to protect water and like other pieces of our ecology if we're just going to be like, oh, 1,500 violations? No big deal. What? Like,
right. So again, well, not even again, I don't know if we've said the word sacrifice zone. Like, what is Appalachia's history? It's a sacrifice zone, and we're done with that. And we've been done with that.
Yeah.
For a long time, but we're united with all of the other places that are treated like trash and treated like sacrifice zones, like the Gulf Coast communities who are subject to petrochemical build out, awful, polluting, cancer-causing industry, the North Slope of Alaska, the Inupiat people who are being subjected to the government pushing this awful Willow project, which is the biggest, I believe it's the biggest oil development project ever proposed on public lands. So, so many places are being extracted upon over and over again, just like Appalachia. So we're definitely, unfortunately, not alone in that.
Yeah, we're a sacrifice zone. And what I think is like, I mean, this is like, that's what capitalism is, right? Like, yes. It depends on the sacrifice of our people, our planet. And like, what I really appreciate about this is like, usually for me, it's like class is the ultimate unifying factor for like social justice. But I think this is too, right? Like this touches on the interconnection of like class and environment and et cetera, where it's like, this is what we have in common with our siblings in the fight who are people of color, who are from these indigenous communities, who are immigrants that are fleeing the climate crisis in their own country or fleeing war. Like, this is what we have in common, is that we are being sacrificed. And like what's happening in Appalachia is not happening only to Appalachians. Like you said, it's like, this is part of the playbook that has been used for years, for generations, in order to produce a profit for whoever the fuck, like, the rest of us, none of us matter. Yeah, exactly. And like, even like I talked to a lawyer a couple of episodes back, she's in law school, but she's a lawyer.
And listen to the episode. That was awesome.
Yes, she's phenomenal. And like, we were talking about how the legal system is created to protect profit ultimately. Right. And like, you illustrated that so well, talking about how like they have used the legal system to aggressively pursue profit in this very situation, like filing these extensions, doing whatever they can, not caring if they're breaking the law, figuring out how to work around it, like regardless of whoever gets hurt in the process, who and what communities get like written off and erased and sacrificed, like you were saying. And this is like, it's one of the things that I think you even might have mentioned earlier on, as you were talking about like how this is much deeper than like just a pipeline, but it's like the erasure of like, it's like re-stealing land that's already been stolen, the erasure of like the communities that are there. And I was actually reading a book. I haven't made or published this episode yet, but for an episode related to like heritage and race and class. And a big piece of this book was like part of, or I guess one of the tools of capitalism is erasing literally from like physical evidence of challenges to capitalism, right? Like, and so even like Blair Mountain, thinking about how like the history of Blair Mountain was an anti-capitalist history, and like the environmental fight for Blair Mountain is still going on, but like literally trying to decapitate Blair Mountain and erase the history that was there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I think about how our fight and our movement has really grown to encompass these things and to address them head on, recognizing, talking about environmental justice is a very different thing from living it, and from really understanding what it is and how to combat it. And, so we are fortunate to work alongside and to learn from some incredible Indigenous, Black, and people of color leaders. And, I think being part of this national movement to end the era of fossil fuels has really just hit home for our fight, that we are part of a network of sacrifice zones, and it is a playbook, like you said, and we're all subject to this. And we don't just want this for Appalachians, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention, when we're talking about like, what's an Appalachian, like what's the identity, when I grew up, I thought it was just poor white people. And it took me a long time to realize that that wasn't the case, longer than I would like to admit. And so a lot of our work now is sort of addressing and facing and internalizing and unlearning all of those harmful sort of practices that have carried white supremacy and racism and classism, and realizing that these industries can come for all of us, which is what sort of, this movement sprung out of, oh my God, this is happening here. And then it became, no, this is not happening anywhere. And we're united, and we're stopping it. We're ending this era. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention one of our incredible co-fighters and partners in this fight, Dr. Crystal Cavalier-Keck, who's the founder of 7 Directions of Service. Her organization works, through educational programs, tons of community outreach, to like mobilize and advocate for Indigenous and other historically marginalized communities in Virginia and West Virginia, and all over Appalachia, North Carolina, definitely North Carolina, because Crystal lives in North Carolina. But and to be a voice for places, lands, waters, people, more than human world who has been erased by capitalism and our colonial system. So Crystal is just somebody that I look to and learn from, and has changed my organizing so much to be more about relationship. Like I started organizing in such an extractive way, and like, just all the systems that we're bound to, all the ways that we think about time and planning, and how white supremacy shows up in our organizing is so insidious. So it's our responsibility. Yes, these systems have happened to us too and have been perpetrated on Appalachians, but it's also our responsibility as white Appalachians to address where we are harmful, and to incorporate this whole systems wide issues into everything that we do in our organizing, so that we are not perpetuating extraction and white supremacy again. So yeah, I just, would be remiss, and other incredible Appalachian orgs, Black by God, West Virginia, Black in Appalachia, Black Appalachian Coalition, there's just a myriad incredible.
I have been hopping in some inboxes, yes! And I'm like, I'm a nobody. So I'm like, they probably don't want to talk to me. So, but if anybody's listening to this and you want to kindly ping any of the above that were just listed, like would love to have their voices on the show.
Yeah.
And it's really important to me. Like, I really appreciated your disclaimer at the beginning around like, I'm not the expert, and the way that I tell this story is not the only way to tell the story. And that is part of the reason that I do intentional, like I, first of all, like intentionally do interviews every other episode. And like, that was a commitment that I made, like when I launched the podcast, because I was like, yeah, I can like read all of these books and like explain all of this stuff, but like my take is not the take. Like my take is a take among a lot of takes, and my Appalachian story is only one story from a massive book. And so I was like, it's important to me to have a diverse collection of voices, and especially voices from people who can talk about that. Like if I tried to cover the MVP, like it would like, I just don't, I mean, I know it's out there, right? And like, I support the fight and have solidarity, but I haven't been in it the way that you've been in it. And so, and then like that said, in having the variety of voices, also intentionally wanting those voices to not be homogenous and like not all look like and sound like my voice. And so like having Sierra, the Indigenous woman in law school, and then having my last interview was with Clover Lynn, who is a trans banjo player from Appalachia. And so like having people who represent sort of, or I guess not represent, but hold different identities is really important. And what I also just appreciate about that work that y'all do internally and like interpersonally and like collectively is, and like what specifically what you named around like unlearning some of the thoughts that have become automatic and like the ways of being that have become automatic, and specifically around like, oh, I used to think of Appalachians as like poor, just all poor white people. And it's like, that's so important because that's like when we, like who benefits from us like writing off any community as just this or just that, right? Like when we write off like when we think of Appalachia as just poor white people, it's okay to sacrifice it, right? Like that's who benefits, like the people who want us to agree to and sign off on their sacrifice of these communities.
It's so backwards, and we've been conditioned to, you know, think in these horribly you know, exclusive and just divisive ways that, you know, have led us to be unfortunately in the situation that we're in now. But I think that there's so many people doing incredible work to bring light to this, and I'm certainly not someone who has brought light to it. I've been brought by the people who are bringing the light to it, and I'm you know, on my own journey to unlearn harmful things, but there's many more leaders who are doing that work and have been doing that work forever. So yeah, again, I know we're on the same page there, but yeah, it's a really inspiring time to be doing this work, because there's so much potential for sort of like, I don't know how, you know, when we talk about being Appalachian, like when you think about certain members of your family that think a certain way or are, you know, politically aligned, like polar opposite from you, like how do we have conversations across these gulfs without like writing off poor white people or, you know, like who are in our families? Like, you know, it's such a critical part of this, and those people are at the mercy of the perpetuated systems of capitalism and classism too. So, you know, it's so complicated, and that's something that's really at the forefront of our minds is, you know, being an Appalachian org and fighting an extractive Appalachian project. Like that's crossing those divides and navigating the harmful viewpoints that can be held, and also the, you know, the unlearning that needs to happen, and recognizing that oftentimes we are not the ones who are suitable. The people who have been most marginalized, you know, Indigenous and Black and people of color, are the ones who are authorized to speak on their behalf, of course. But it's so complex, and that's one thing I love and hate about Appalachia. It's a love-hate relationship, just the complexity and the beauty within, and what I love so much about it, but also the systemic sort of harms and problems that we're also aware of and we're trying to address. So
yeah. A lot of, again, my background being in social work, it's been this COVID.
No, you're fine.
It's been a journey, but, you know, I have had to move from like a place of viewing political organizing as like, I need to teach people,
right,
and shifting to like, I need to walk with people while they heal. Like, and that's it. Like that is organizing. And healing's fucking ugly. Like,
oh my God.
When you pour some hydrogen peroxide in a cut, like that shit doesn't feel good, you know?
Right.
And so like people who are healing from gestures vaguely, like all of this, which is all of us, like it's not going to look good the whole time. And they're going to say things that aren't cool. And they're going to say things that they regret, and like shame, forcing internalized shame for those things is like the opposite of moving people into a shared sense of liberation. And so that is just, like
1,000%. People are in a shame pit. And if you pile on, it ain't helping.
Exactly. Yep. It's not. If you want to start seeing all these rural communities stop voting like hard red, like,
I mean, look at the social media comments about the floods in Kentucky.
Oh my God. Like, so here in Haywood County, we had for us it was Tropical Storm Fred last year. I'm in Madison Cawthorn's district.
God,
well, he lost his primary, but to Chuck Edwards, who arguably could be more dangerous because he is equally as evil and way smarter and way more strategic than Cawthorn, but that's for another conversation. But yeah, so Tropical Storm Fred, I mean, I had a friend who was literally living in an RV that they never even found when it flooded in Crusoe, because like it was the same thing here. It's like trailers just got washed away, like off their foundation. And so when I saw those comments about Kentucky, it's like, y'all are about to force me to the other side of the spectrum, and I'm about as far left as it gets over here. Like, people are so, and that's capitalism fucking depends on it, right? Like when we are able to
cut off our humanity,
dehumanize someone, or like decide that they are not valuable as a human for something like what we perceive to be their political beliefs, which like that totally also disregards like gerrymandering and voter suppression and like all of the tactics that went into play to make sure that things turned out the way that they did in the elections beyond voting. It's just, it was disgusting. Okay. That said, I know you wanted to talk about the latest deal with Manchin. I also wanted to talk about, like, this is very relevant because I have seen surfacings of Mountain Valley Pipeline being mentioned in association with the bill that just dropped, the Inflation Reduction Act. And this is supposed to be a major climate bill. And yet it would appear as if Manchin basically sold West Virginia in order to sign off on this bill.
Where do I even start with this? So thank you for bringing this up, because this is critical. It's a absolutely critical moment for this fight. I mean, the fact that Senator Manchin's pet project is up on the table as a bargaining chip is completely insane and unacceptable. And the fact that communities have been just offered up as continued sacrifice zones, you know, in this side deal is just abhorrent. So yeah, I can sort of walk us through the situation that we're in right now. And I want to start off by grounding us kind of the same way I did before with the MVP story, like grounding us in West Virginia. I'm not a West Virginian. My family is from the border of West Virginia, in Bath County, borders Pocahontas County in West Virginia. And you know, I don't want to speak for West Virginians, but I work with a lot of phenomenal West Virginians and West Virginian orgs. And these people are fighting to protect their state, to protect their communities, to end this cycle that Manchin is perpetuating. And so I don't speak for all West Virginians, but we are fighting like hell with West Virginia.
There's a lot more fighting happening on the ground than anyone that's not from this area ever gives us credit for.
Absolutely. And that's exactly the point. And so, you know, when it's framed as Manchin doing good things for West Virginia, that's my response. And, you know, a lot of POWHR is made up of groups from West Virginia and Virginia. So we are going to continue fighting this pipeline and fighting for a better future for West Virginia. And, you know, recognizing that that's not the only story, and it's a lot more complicated than that. But so all that is to say that we recognize that people are fucking hurting right now in Appalachia, especially, but in so many other places. They need help. They need climate action. They need climate legislation. They need flood resilience funds. They need investments in clean energy. They need new jobs. Like, we understand and we support and we recognize that. But it does not and cannot come at the cost of sacrificing communities. So it's such a, IRA aside, I don't really, I'd rather focus on this side deal, as you said, that's in front of us now. And as we speak, or maybe it's already happened, I think the House was voting on the IRA today. So of course we recognize the dire need for climate action and have been advocating that for ever. So yes, according to released materials, there's several versions floating around. There is a version that Senator Manchin sort of alluded to that's like a one-pager that the Washington Post put out that has a variety of wish list items, we're sort of calling them, for permitting for infrastructure projects. And that would, of course, include fossil fuel projects. And also Capito from West Virginia, Senator Capito. Sorry, I might, hold on.
Totally. Fact check yourself.
Yeah, I was going to make sure she was a senator. Yeah.
Yeah.
Senator Shelley Moore Capito attempted to add an amendment to this effect. When the Senate was passing the IRA, Senator Capito attempted to add an amendment that was essentially that side deal that we're talking about to that. And of course that was rejected, thank God. But she tried. And the side deal explicitly mentions the Mountain Valley Pipeline. So essentially green lighting the completion of the MVP. And I want to preface this by saying this is all proposed. We do not have bill language. We do not have official drafts. So I'm operating off of conjecture here. I want to make that very clear. However, it's just an astounding move to put someone's like basically pet project into legislation like this when there are so many necessary roadblocks for a project like this to go through. All the permits, authorizations, which they don't have so many of them, by the way, like we talked about. There's a reason that those permits exist, to prevent bad ideas from becoming reality. And you cannot bypass those, bedrock environmental laws. They're critical. And, the sort of dangers of this released versions of this potential side deal that Democratic leadership made with Senator Joe Manchin to secure his vote include, changes to the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, which is really critical to public input and protecting frontline communities having a say when a project like this is slated for them. It's critical to tribal sovereignty and would have huge implications for that. It would have implications for the pieces of free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC, that the meager parts that the U.S. does respect. And again, I would turn to our Indigenous partners to speak to their concerns with that, of course, more eloquently and knowledgeably than I can. But there's critical threats to those things, and also to the Clean Water Act and to state sovereignty under the Clean Water Act. So North Carolina, and you might know this already, denied a Clean Water Act Section 401 permit for the Mountain Valley Pipeline Southgate because they said, we don't really know, the main line seems uncertain, so we're going to deny unnecessary harm to our waters and communities. Well, if this permitting wish list was granted in the potential language that we have seen, that authority may be impacted. North Carolina may not be able to make that decision to prevent unnecessary harm to their state again if this wish list passes. And again, it's conjecture, but it's really serious. And it would, tremendously impact frontline communities and the bedrock environmental laws that we have to protect and to stop these things from happening and to expedite them. That's what it threatens to do, is to expedite these projects. So we, we are united in our demand to stop the MVP. And we will not be sacrificed. And Congress must oppose this side permitting wish list Manchin American Petroleum Institute deal. They just must. And one of the drafts has an American Petroleum Institute watermark on it. So that tells you a lot about who wrote the draft. And if folks who are listening aren't familiar with the long and horrifically impactful and influential history of the American Petroleum Institute on this country and capitalism, I highly suggest listening to Amy Westervelt's podcast, Drilled. She goes into their incredible propaganda influence and lobbying influence on this country, and it continues to this day. So that is the situation that we're in, with that side deal potential kind of hovering as like a cloud above us, and MVP being specifically mentioned, and also other implications affecting other project areas, sacrifice zones like the Gulf and Alaska that I mentioned would also be sort of fast tracked through some of the provisions that we have seen floated in possible language. So we are opposing this with all of our might. This is unacceptable, and it cannot stand. And so we're really touched by all of the other frontline fights that are joining with us. And there's been a lot of tension in the climate movement about the Inflation Reduction Act. And, I don't even want to touch that because this is the situation ahead of us. And we are one of those, representing those frontline communities who are being thrown under the bus here. So there was a negotiation and none of us were party to it. And, a lot of people in it was pretty much a closed door negotiation for half the government too. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so fucking sick of for-profit politics.
Me too.
Like I'm just like, if you are a Republican and you believe in states' rights, then like, what the fuck? You can't support this, right? And then like, if you're a Democrat, like, and you want like the Sunrise Movement kids and like Appalachians to vote for you, then stop fucking selling us. Like, stop it. Like, it's that easy. Like, I just don't. And I started my community organizing journey like in the Democratic Party, and it's shit like this that literally like moved me like so far left, because I was like, electoral politics is just not where it's at. Like, none of them have our best interest in mind, and this proves it. It's like all they want to do is take their pet projects to Washington, D.C. and have unchecked power and the ability to make money off of those projects. I mean, Manchin's whole journey in politics has been accompanied by an increasing income from his fucking coal projects that he has used every ounce of power he has had to like protect and like make sure that they're safe. Like the sludge that he makes his money off of is like the only one left now.
And all that to say, I don't know if you saw, we were, thrilled is horribly the wrong word, but we were thankful that our movement was on the cover of the New York Times last week in that story about a New York Times reporter came to the pipeline route and told the story and talked about the donations that Schumer and Manchin have received from backers of the MVP. Yep. So I mean, it's just
and they're both Democrats. I mean, Manchin, like, even if people are like, yeah, but he's only a Democrat and like, name only, it's like, but the Democrats accept him, they cow to him, like they don't kick him out of their party. So he's a Democrat. Like,
oh yeah, it's just, I mean, yeah. And for us, it's really like, we cannot say enough that this is an all hands on deck moment for this movement, and we will not be sacrificed. Like, that is our refrain.
And we cannot fucking depend on the people in power to do the right thing. We just can't do it.
Us. and are, long-standing people who have been fighting for justice and, for environmental justice forever, who are going to bring this to the attention and the outcome that it deserves, which is for this bill to be killed and the MVP to be stopped. So.
And it's definitely within our power. And there's a whole lot more of us than there are of them. And like, we just need to be loud enough that we're heard and they'll be shaken in their boots. And they've shown that already. Like, so I'm curious, like, if someone is listening to this and they're like, I'm pissed. This story is fucked up. I want to help. Let's imagine there's two different kinds of people listening to this. One is someone who is not in this area, doesn't live in a frontline community, that wants to give support to this work and help thwart the side deal that could advance this MVP. Like what should their next steps be?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for caring and for being part of this movement, because you are part of this movement, even if you're just hearing about it and, curious about it. And I came to the climate movement, intimidated and unsure of where I fit in. And I was lucky enough to attend a book club at Wild Virginia, which I'm a book nerd and I do book clubs at POWHR. Shout out to anyone that loves books. Sign up for our newsletter, which is what I'm going to ask you to do anyway. And you can hear about our book clubs. But I was lucky enough to find an inroad to the climate and environmental justice movement through a really community-based and non-threatening way where I didn't have to be an expert. And so I'm really huge about people feeling like this is accessible to them and like they're welcome in this movement, and broadening this movement is one of my top priorities. So, if you're somebody that is raising a family, extremely busy, working under capitalism, trying to survive, even signing up for our newsletter is a phenomenal way to get this message out to more people. We share calls to action. We share updates, stories, events. You never know. Sometimes we ask people from across the country to like do something in solidarity with us. Go to your, town hall and talk about sacrifice zones and how they're all connected, to hold up a sign, read about People vs. Fossil Fuels Coalition and see how you can help. So if you go to our website, POWHR.org, there'll be a pop-up there that tells you to sign up for a newsletter, or you can find the link there front and center. But that's like the simplest thing I could ask somebody to do. And it means a lot to us. And we write those, by hand, and we curate them to have sort of different levels of action that people can take and join us, really, is what that's doing.
Love that. Awesome. So that seems like a great inroad no matter where someone is based. Is there a different next step that you would suggest for someone who is hearing this and is like living in kind of one of the frontline communities and is like, oh, snap, I didn't even know this was which is like, they probably knew it was happening, but they're like, oh, I didn't realize how bad it was, or something like that. And they're like, how do I join this fight?
I mean, totally. We have people all the time who are finding out about it, just, even if they live in proximity, because you said it's by design, right? It's by design to quash the resistance and to keep the details out of the public's hands and sort of limit the ways that people can resist. So another thing, do not feel guilty if you're just finding out about this or other projects and you haven't before, because that's how the system is designed. It's not your fault. And that's what we're working to change. So I'm huge about that too, because I was one of those people. That's how I came to this. The ACP was going through Bath County. It got canceled, thankfully, Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And I didn't find out about it until years in. So that's just how it goes. And we just got to be compassionate to each other about this. But I would suggest for those people, we are working really hard to figure out how we're going to bring this message to Congress that, we will not be sacrificed, and we're united with all sacrifice zones, and the MVP can't happen and the side deal cannot happen. So we are working on a mobilization to DC to bring frontline folks to their legislators and facilitate these meetings where people can, meetings and interactions and lobbying and, just a show of massive public opposition to this. And we are hoping to do that on September 8th in DC. It's quick, but we have had to react like lightning quick. This stuff is secret and it moves at a lightning pace. So if you're interested to come to DC to meet up with your legislator. We can help you set up a meeting. And then we're going to have a rally in the evening with Appalachia focused music and art and frontline speakers. And it's going to be by the Capitol. The Capitol is going to be within view. So, we are sort of co-constructing this with all of our allies in the Stop MVP Coalition and People versus Fossil Fuels. So I have to shout all those people out. And that's a way. And if you can't come to DC, call your legislator, sign up for our newsletter, no matter what, sign up for our newsletter, because we'll tell you how to call your legislator, write your legislator, come to DC, take action wherever you're at. That's the key to all of the different ways where you can plug in. But yes, DC mobilization, Appalachian Resistance is coming to DC, and we're done being a sacrifice zone. And we're united with everybody else that's been thrown under the bus. So that's what I would say.
That's like a great note to end on too. I'm like, we're fucking taking the Appalachian Resistance to DC. They aren't ready for this shit. I love that. I am so grateful that you were able to come on the show. And also want to be respectful of your time. I know we've been together for like an hour and 15 minutes.
Oh my gosh,
I'll stay on the rest of the night if you want to, but I'm like, you probably have plans to prep before you go out of town. But before we do wrap, is there anything that you were hoping that you would get to share today that you didn't get the chance to?
I just want to say thank you for facilitating and for reaching out to have this conversation with me and for spotlighting this movement. I'm really, really honored to be here. And there's so many people who could and should be here in my stead, who have been in the fight longer and are bringing different perspectives. And, I'm just really honored to be here with you and have had this conversation. And thank you for the work that you're doing. So many people in our movement are so hype and excited about this podcast and the work that you're doing. And this is just exactly what we need. And I just love it because, you and I know this is near and dear to our hearts. We love Appalachia. We're glad to be in community with people who are fighting for a better Appalachia and the Appalachia that we love and that we know can come to be. So it just, warms my heart and makes me really emotional when I get to be part of these things. And the work that you're doing is just couldn't be more perfect for the movement and the moment that we're in. So thank you. And that's what I'll end on.
All right, y'all, that's a wrap on the bonus episode, the very first bonus episode of Rednecks Rising, the anti-racist, anti-fascist, anti-capitalist Appalachian podcast. I appreciate all y'all out there who are listening to this episode. So grateful for POWHR and Grace for coming on the show today, for all of the work that they do on the front lines to protect our lands and these ancient mountains and uplift the voices of BIPOC leaders, and thankful for all y'all out there who care enough about stuff like this to give it a platform where we get to uplift these stories and this work and this history, and where we get to take it and really use it to participate actively in social transformation. Don't forget that this is just one piece of this story, and there are a few resources in the show notes that can help you get started as you look for some of the other chapters in this story. I hope y'all have a great rest of your week, and Lord willing and the creek don't rise, I'll see you again on Tuesday.